Welcome to Minimizing Risk when Including BIM in Your Construction Contracts. This webinar is part 1, The Knowledge Divide, a webinar brought to you by AIA Contract Documents. I'll now turn it over to the moderator for today's session, Jimmy Germano, Senior Manager and Counsel with AIA Contract Documents.
Thanks, Hasi. I appreciate it. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to be your moderator today, and I'm joined by 3 expert panelists who will introduce themselves shortly. But first, just a few logistical items to get out of the way. This presentation is copywritten. There's some other information on the slide here. And then secondly, our disclaimer, and pretty important, it's just to verify and confirm that we're not providing any legal advice today. There's other information here on the slide, but if you do have questions specifically that could impact yourself or your firm, we would always recommend that you not act upon this information that we give you today without seeking appropriate legal counsel on the particular facts and circumstances at issue in your case. So I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm going to be the host and moderator for today's webinar. My name is Jimmy Germano. I'm a Senior Manager and Counsel with the AIA Contract Documents program. Before I came over to AIA Contract Documents, I was a construction litigator for about 7 years in the DC area, representing mostly general contractors, but also architects, subcontractors, suppliers, owners, developers, in all types of claims, going from pre-construction, doing contract negotiations, all the way through to post-construction claims, litigation, and that sort of thing. So I'm really proud and pleased to introduce the 3 panelists that we have today. And I'll let them introduce themselves, but I first just want to give a very brief preview. So we're joined today by Mr. James Bedrick, who's a principal at AEC Process Engineering. He joins us from California. Mr. Steve Hagen is the CEO of Hagen Technologies, LLC, and he joins us from Virginia. And then last but certainly not least, Mr. Peter Longley, who is the Director of Operations for CBT Architects, and he joins us from Boston. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen because we're actually just going to do a moderated discussion today. And I'll ask Mr. Bedrick, Mr. Hagen, and Mr. Longley, if you could introduce yourselves to the folks today. So I guess first I'll ask Mr. Bedrick, could you please just introduce yourself and tell everyone a little about who you are and what you do?
Thanks, Jimmy. Well, I've worked all 3 sides of this industry for, more years than I'll admit. I've been on the AIA Documents Committee, or had been for about, it was 12 or 13 years, I think it was, and just rolled off. Most of my work has been around collaboration between disciplines. And I brought that into my work at the AIA Documents Committee, and I chaired the group that brought out the 2013 version of the digital practice documents.
Great. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, and I'm Steve Hagen.
Mr. Hagen, why don't you go next?
Thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be here. This is really an exciting opportunity, and we're so excited about these BIM docs publishing and getting used by across all the spectrum of the industry. My background, 10 years, I'm at the 10th year of my tenure at the AIA Documents Committee. It has just been a tremendous thing, and to have this at the culmination of my time there is exciting. Prior to that, 37 years as an architect for the federal government and the public sector. So really, I'm coming from an owner's standpoint, and at the final couple years that I spent at GSA, we really spent a lot of time moving the ball forward on initiating some issues and initiatives with BIM and kind of other technologies. So very happy to be here and participate with this group.
Great. Thanks, Steve. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Peter Longley.
Hi, everybody. So I've been in the practice of architecture for 46 years now. I started as a draftsman, drawing by hand. Eventually overcame my fear of the computer and got into AutoCAD and GDS and AutoCAD again and MicroStation and now Revit. So I've been exposed to a lot of the hands-on things, but overcome the criticism of people being afraid that I'd work on the model, I might accidentally delete it. So I'm a little bit past that. I've also been pretty heavily involved in reviewing contracts and risk management issues. People who've only known me late in my career accuse me of being an attorney. I'm not an attorney. The only attorney on this call is Jimmy. And I'm proud to have been on the AIA documents committee. I'm now in my 8th year. I chaired our most recent set of revisions to the BIM sharing protocol documents, which will be coming out in July. So there's an advance secret, so that you can all be somewhat excited about these new documents that are coming out. I think they're going to be great. They're a very nice step forward on the foundation that was laid by Jim. And Jim was part of, and Steve were, of course, part of our task group.
Of course. Yeah, thanks, Peter. Yeah, so this is part one of a multi-part series that leads up to and culminates in the release of the AIA's new BIM document. We're not going to cover everything today. We're going to set the stage and talk about some big ticket items, some big picture items that sort of framed the way that the AIA Contract Documents Committee approached revising the 2013 BIM documents, which are exhibits and other forms that you would attach to your contract that deal specifically with BIM issues. So over the next couple of months, if you're interested in the AIA's new BIM documents, again, coming out this summer, then definitely tune in to the rest of this webinar series, because we're going to cover a lot of what's going to go in there and preview a lot of those topics and clauses and frameworks and that sort of thing. The next presentation is May 18th at 1 o'clock, and there'll be a registration page up shortly on our website. But enough about part two. Let's get into part one. So I want to talk about something called the knowledge divide. And Jim, you sort of introduced me to this topic, whenever we started talking, maybe 3 years ago or so, when we started looking at the BIM documents, and we were thinking about this thing called the knowledge divide, and we got into it. So the first thing I want to do is maybe explain to our listeners and viewers today, when we talk about the knowledge divide in BIM, what is it and why is it so important? And I'll ask Jim.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy. We identified this some years ago when we first started working on these documents. The issue is that we put out some 200 contracts and exhibits and forms and so on. They're all understood well by the firm leaders and the legal people in firms, all of them except these digital practice documents. And the issue is that these documents address business issues such as risk, fee, staff commitment, and so on, but they also address purely technical issues such as building information modeling processes, deliverables, supporting infrastructures, and so on. The problem is that the legal people and the leaders understand the business implications. The people in the trenches understand the technical implications, and very few people at all understand both. And yet they are inextricably intertwined. The decisions or the agreements that the legal people make have great impacts on things like necessary infrastructure, training, and so on. And the agreements that the technical people make can put the firm at great risk and can affect fees. So what we want to do today is begin to bridge this divide by really providing enough that both sides can understand how they're at a high level, how their decisions and work affects the other side. So Jimmy?
Yeah, Jim, you mentioned fees, and I'm wondering, can you elaborate a little bit on that? I'm sure, you know, if you're a manager of an architecture firm or a construction company and you're tuning in today and you hear the word fees, that's going to pique your interest, right? You want to know how this is going to, when the rubber meets the road on this and it impacts fees. Can you talk a little bit about how the knowledge divide between, you know, maybe say the attorneys who are negotiating the contracts on the one hand and the BIMers, the people who are doing the modeling, the divide between them, how is that going to impact potentially the fees on a project?
Well, there's a couple of ways. One is many of us have seen requirements from owners come down with everything on a model, an LOD matrix, everything at 400. Often the legal people tend to say, oh yeah, okay, we do modeling, fine, we'll sign off on it. It's kind of a ludicrous proposal because nobody is going to, you're never ever going to see a model like that, but a lot of people just sign off on it. If you do sign off on it, yeah, you're not going to wind up building a model like that, but you could wind up putting a lot more detail into a model than your usual practice, and that is going to cost staff time and therefore money. The other thing is that then the same thing can happen when the people in the trenches start putting in more detail. That takes up time, and if they're putting in more detail than is necessary, that puts the firm, or can put the firm, at risk. So all in all, there's a big range of risk and effort and so on that can go into modeling, and that can definitely affect the fee. The other thing that you need to look at is most of these agreements will have somewhere somebody is going to manage the model, and somebody's going to manage the electronic document management system or whatever you have as a central point. That takes staff time and therefore fee. So all of these things need to be looked at when you're signing off on an agreement to make sure that you have the staff effort and the training and the infrastructure covered in your fee structure. I think you're muted, Jimmy.
I am muted, thank you. So in addition to fees, I think if I recall a conversation we had when we were developing these documents, we also talked about things like, you know, commitment of resources and project scheduling. So am I understanding it correctly that this knowledge divide can impact, you know, pretty much everything when it comes to modeling, not just fees? Can it impact things like schedule or commitment of resources or liability, risk down the road, things like that as well?
Absolutely. And this is where the people who are negotiating the contracts need to understand a little bit about what they're committing the firm to as far as the modeling effort goes. Okay, so it's kind of to me, it all kind of rolls into the same thing. I mean, if you can commit as much staff as you want, you just have to have the fee to cover it, right? So you must get a good handle on what is going to be the level of effort that's going to go into the modeling. Is it just going to be for visualization? Are we going to do clash detection? Are we going to do estimating from the model? Whatever. You have to know something about that because each of those uses will add staff effort.
That makes sense. And then if you know the use up front, I would imagine understanding the uses properly. So having internal communications with your own BIM team, if you're a contract negotiator, for example, that will allow you to better negotiate the BIM exhibit because you'll be able to know what your scope is, how developed the model is going to be, and what the anticipated uses are going to be, such that you can then insert those terms and negotiate those terms into the exhibit. Am I understanding that right?
Absolutely. And so 2 points. One, the documents that we just developed come right up front. One of the very first things they address is the uses that the modeling effort is going to be put to. What the negotiators need to, under the level of knowledge they need to have really is to kind of see red flags. Like, okay, we're going to use this we're going to hand the model off to the contractor for automated layout of the interior walls. Okay, fine, but the negotiator had better see that as a red flag and talk to the technical people, know enough to talk to the technical people and find out what that means in terms of effort and risk.
Great. We just got a question in from one of our attendees, and I think it fits perfectly into this discussion. So rather than wait to the end, I'm gonna ask it now. And the question deals with we've sort of been focusing so far on the divide between the maybe the legal team and the BIMers and the doers, and vis-a-vis maybe an architecture firm. Jim, can you talk a little bit about how the knowledge divide would impact these negotiations from an owner's perspective? So what should an owner understand about the BIM process as it relates to this particular discussion of the knowledge divide? If an owner is going to want the model after construction, for example, to do facilities management, is that something that they should know upfront and negotiate it in, or is that something that can just wait until the end of the project and they can let everybody know then?
It should be negotiated up front, because that's one of these major uses that can impact how the model is developed. And what we see is a lot of owners just simply ask for as much as they can possibly get. That all costs the owner money. So they really need to look at it and decide what do they really need, what is going to be useful to them, and then negotiate for that. Okay, because we've seen an awful lot of people want very, very detailed models for facilities management, and that really is counterproductive. What the owner needs to do is sit down with their facilities team, decide what they're going to do with the model, and then ask for the minimum, because that will make the model more nimble and easier to handle.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. Thank you. So I want to move to maybe a little bit of a role-playing hypothetical here. So bear with me for a second. I'll sort of set the stage. So Jim just introduced this topic of a knowledge divide, right? Let's say you have the lawyers or the firm managers. They're negotiating the contracts, and then in another room, there's the people who are actually doing the modeling, the BIMers. So I want to talk a little bit about sort of, let's zoom in on each room and talk about like what that room is focused on and how we can bridge the divide. So let's say that Steve, we'll take you for example. Let's make you like the BIMer. You're the person doing the BIM model. You are putting it together. You are boots on the ground every day doing it. And then Pete, let's say that you're the negotiator, right? You're the C-level executive, and you are just focused on the contract terms, and you've never touched a model in your life, hypothetically speaking. So with that sort of with that framework in mind, I want to ask both of you a couple questions to sort of get your insights from how you would understand things and kind of the impact that would have. So Steve, I want to go to you first. You're the BIMer, you're the boots on the ground, you're sitting in front of your computer, you're doing the modeling. So you are on that side of the knowledge divide, right? You're not necessarily aware of what's going on in the contract negotiations per se. So I'll just sort of ask a broad question and say, like, what are you focused on as a modeler? What's important to you? What are you focused on day to day?
Well, that's a good question, and I think the idea of a BIMer and a doer is really important, and I think it starts with the beginning of the project. And I think one of the things we've done with our new contract documents is really look at some structure to how the team accomplishes their work. So one of the key things at the beginning is we do a BIM execution plan. We really think about planning what we're doing before we're actually doing it. And that involves asking some questions. And I guess I want to make sure that everyone thinks about the fact that a BIMer and a doer, the team, is not just internal to a firm. Depending on the resources you have in a firm, you have some outside consultants. You have structural, you have acoustics, you have any number of consultants who are all involved in this. And then you mentioned the idea of the owner or the client. You know, big projects have technical teams on their side. And so you're often working on the with the technical team on the other side. And that the way we're getting to the point where we're communicating through models now. I think that's really the exciting thing, is that this is the communication tool. So we're no longer, doing paper and pencil, and we're really moving forward with models in 3 dimensions, models with both graphics and data attached to them, and really able to work interactively with team members. So it's a little more complex who I am as a BIMer and a doer than just somebody at a computer. And it's also, there's a structure to the top designers in the firm. May or may not be technically adept, but how they get their work done is by them communicating from the top down to all of the people. And then also, there's a lot of times there's physical models built that are then converted into 3-dimensional models. And, from the beginning, it's a lot of geometry and sculptural, but then it quickly becomes additional aspects to it, including building materials. How are they performing? How does everyone expect them to perform? How do they expect to last? How do you actually construct things is another question. How do I insert lots of mechanical into a tiny amount of space? All those things are, all of the modeling is really allowing us to kind of check some of those things as we move along in a much better way. So I'm seeing with a lot of the projects much better quality control, much better coordination. But getting back to the topic at hand of the knowledge divide, very important topic, because typically what's happened is I just got the contract and now I've been working on it, but now I'm reading what the contract says, and it's not what our team has been working on. So I think what we're really talking about here is the executives and the technical people at the very beginning are in the same room, talking about where are we going with this project? How is it going to be accomplished? Before they get into 2 different rooms, they're kind of in a great room talking together. And that's going to be a key, is just really better, solid communication.
So that's a great point, Steve. So, and you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to ask about strategies to help bridge this divide, and then I think you hit on it perfectly to say that, if I'm understanding you correctly, one of the things that's really important is maybe a pre-contract negotiation internal coordination, whether it's a construction firm, an architecture firm, a supplier, even an owner, to get together before you even start the contract negotiation and say, what do we want out of our model? How expensive do we want the model to be? How do we want to commit our resources? And then the negotiators can go negotiate the contract. Is that sort of what you're saying? Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, and also, so what are our technical capabilities of our team? How sophisticated are we, and to what extent are our consultants able to participate? So I think you're really looking at an issue of talent and resources, and how best to do it in the most effective way. And I think that's going to be a key question. Typically in the past, the executives, I don't know if they had a clue about what their talent was able to actually accomplish. So I think that's going to be a very important topic.
I actually have a follow-up to that, Steve. If, let's say you're in that internal coordination meeting that you suggested, right, and you realize that maybe you don't have the right resources for what you expect the requirements to be. What are some strategies maybe to adapt to that? Is that something that you consider, maybe we'll just put our head in the sand and we'll try it anyway and see what happens? Or maybe do you bring in other resources? Do you try and partner with someone who has the resources? Do you quickly get up to speed? How might you attack that?
Well, and I hate to say this, but this is the world we live in right now. All of firms are struggling with getting the right human capital on board and working on projects. So I think it's first of all being realistic and then reaching outside the firm perhaps to talent that can help you out with technical expertise. And then I hate to say it, but keeping things simple. What is the most important thing we're trying to deliver here, and keep those priorities in mind. And I think Jim was the one that mentioned people can get off track, start doing more detailed modeling, going in a wrong direction as opposed to staying in a kind of very well orchestrated and consistent way. So that's going to be a really important thing. And so that's where the big room, on the wall, the plan, everyone together is very important. We call it a BIM execution plan for the technical people, but maybe there's a whole team execution collaboration thing that we're starting to talk about that we may want to really emphasize, not in the documents themselves, but maybe outside the documents in a guide or whatever. And we really would like to get some feedback from the industry about how that's working right now.
That's a really good point. I thought of a question as a follow-up to something you had just said about these pre-negotiations, internal meetings in the great room where you get together with your whole team.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think should happen once, just we meet once for an hour and we got it? Or is that something where maybe as a best practice you meet a couple of times or maybe on a weekly basis internally and keep learning throughout the process? What do you think about that?
No, I think it should be ongoing. It may be structured to various stages of delivery, because the work that you're doing at conceptual and schematics is a whole different level of work. And then as you get to design development, you've got more consultants involved. Depending on the delivery method, you may have contractors and trades starting to get involved. And that again has another set of executives on their side. So I think it's an ongoing process, and everyone, I think, working together in that great room is going to be a key to success.
That's a really great point. Thanks, Steve. So I want to maybe take our hypothetical here, and we'll walk from Steve's office, in front of his computer doing the modeling. Let's walk down the hall. And let's go to Pete's office. So Pete is he's our contract negotiator. He's our lawyer. He's the person who, maybe doesn't do modeling on a day-to-day basis, knows enough about it to be scary, but on the other side of that knowledge divide. So Pete, we just walked into your office. You're a contract negotiator. You're on the negotiation, the contract side, the risk management side of BIM. I'll just sort of ask the general question again. What's important to you? What are you focused on a day-to-day basis as a lawyer, as a contract negotiator?
So I think it's helpful to think for a moment of how we got here. The whole idea of drawing a model is, think of the example of a cube. It's got 6 sides. If I could draw one drawing that produces a floor plan or roof plan and all 4 elevations at the same time, and if I move any one piece, it updates all of the other views. Wow, that's a great way of producing the construction documents that I have to produce according to my contract, because my contract says I have to produce construction documents. So that's really where the idea of where modeling came from. However, once that got out into the marketplace, contractors started looking at it and started seeing, hey, can I see your model? I want to see if I can fit my ductwork in and my pipes, and I want to see, all that stuff. And they started telling the owner, well, if we do all of this, we can eliminate change orders, because we can fix things on paper before they get built wrong. And so when that started to happen, it's like, okay, the 2D drawings are still the contract documents, but I want your model. So now we're in that world, and now I'm dealing with owners, with clients who've been to a 45-minute or 1-hour seminar about BIM, and now they know everything about BIM and they want it. They don't know what they want, but they know they want it because their contractor, who's talking into their ear saying, I need that model, and architects for years have been saying, well, listen, I'll give you the model, but it's pretty but useless, because I'm not going to allow you to rely on it. I want you to rely on these 2D drawings over here. So a lot of what's going on here is risk management, because Steve knows, he's been in the room with all the guys building the models. He knows that that people put fake lines in, and they do all other sorts of stuff in order to force the 2D drawings to look right, because the 2D drawings are the only drawings that matter. They're the contract documents. But now if somebody gets the model, well, that there's a line faked in there, and I didn't know that was going to happen, and they start to measure it, and it's not right, and whatever, and all sorts of risk management issues. So my immediate reaction is, I'll give you the model, but it's pretty but useless. Pay attention to these 2D drawings over here. So that to me, as a risk manager, as an owner of an architectural firm, that's where I want to go. And I get very concerned about the people who are down in, working with Steve in the drafting room, if I can call it that, offering to give this stuff away to people, without including all this stuff that I included in my contract about, it's pretty but useless. There's a lot of risk that they could be bringing on the firm by giving this stuff away without necessarily, understanding it. Well, why shouldn't the contractor have it? It's a good idea, right? And he asked for it nicely, so I'll give it to him. So, I realize that's kind of a bit of a confused mess, but that's more or less where we're at, where we've got owners and contractors who don't understand why architects don't want to give them stuff that they should be able to give. And frankly, sitting back and thinking about it, don't we as a profession want to be more collaborative? Don't we want to find ourselves in a position where there are less change orders and there are fewer problems, because somebody's going to come asking me to pay for those change orders if it's based on a bad set of construction documents that I produce. So we're all working together to try to find out what is a reasonable compromise on what can be relied on, and if you're asking to rely on more, then I need to at least have a conversation with the guys down in Steve's room so that I understand, hey, somebody's asking for this. Can you do that? And is it going to cost me extra because I'm negotiating the fee right now? So anyway, streamless, stream of consciousness there.
Now that I have a couple follow-up questions. That's really interesting. So, you had talked about increased collaboration, and I want to zoom in on that for a second. And we actually have a question on this topic, so I think it's appropriate. How, or I guess, what would be a strategy to allow everybody on the project? So you have, let's say a very simple project. You have an owner, a contractor, and an architect, and that's it. Let's just assume a simple framework for now. How do you make sure that the contractor knows what the owner and the architect have agreed to? And how do you make sure that the architect knows what the owner and the contractor have agreed to? Because I've heard horror stories of contractors not knowing that the owner and the architect agreed to something about the model, and then they say, well, we based our bid on the assumption that the model would be made available to us. Or an architecture firm might be in that same situation. Excuse me. So how do you deal with that?
Well, this sounds like a sales opportunity for the new 2022 AIA.
Perfect.
Actually, there are a bunch of things that can be decided and discussed at a high level in the beginning with some sense of, I know that's going to cost more. I need to talk to my people. I'll find out and I'll get back to you. The primary uses for the model are important. And the owner who's been to this 45-minute, 60-minute seminar, and doesn't know what he's asking for, and as Jim said, he's asking for everything at LOD 400 because he heard about that, and that's even better. Don't realize that when they're asking for things, they may be asking for things that eliminate competitive bidding. In how you go about assigning your LODs, because an LOD 300 or 350 or 400 is based more on a specific thing, but if you want to buy a different air handler, it might be a different size, so maybe it should have been LOD 200. So understanding how you're setting up the contract documents, which will become bid documents to facilitate better pricing, should be factored into developing some of this stuff. But likewise, there are decisions that need to be made at the time of execution of the contract, and then other things that frankly just need to be deferred later to Steve and his team. Not necessarily part of the contract, equally important, but something that's not going to delay getting the contract executed. And Steve can go off and build his BIM execution plan and carry it out with his team, interacting with the other consultants, either hired by us or hired by the owner, and potentially interacting with some design build or design assist contractors who may also be contributing to the modeling process. And then, of course, there's the ongoing business of updating the model potentially during construction, which is what contractors want tremendously. They all want to see the architectural model updated by the architect as a background to overlay their shop drawings that they're generating for all of the mechanical and electrical systems that are being integrated into the model. So thinking about all these services and whether it's more efficient for the owner to buy these services from the architect for one cost, or potentially to buy them from the contractor who's got an obligation to perhaps produce record documents at the end. All of these things begin to factor into the global decision, but there are necessarily things that Steve needs to be in control of that aren't necessarily part of the contract, though they may affect the contract later. If they do, he's going to be calling me. And we'll be figuring it out whether we need an ad service to do something because somebody changed what they now like to do with the model.
You mentioned LOD 400 a couple of times, and Jim, you had mentioned this earlier on. As somebody, I'm not a modeler. I don't create BIM models. So to me, as somebody who's sort of a novice in the industry, I'm thinking, hey, LOD 400 across the board, that sounds great. It's better than LOD 300, better than LOD 200. I assume they work in, they increase in development. So yeah, just give me everything in LOD 400, and that seems reasonable. So as a firm manager, as a contract negotiator, Pete, why is that a problem?
Well, Pete's dumbed down way of explaining the LODs is as follows. LOD 100 is a concept, LOD 200 is a design, LOD 300 is a construction document, LOD 350 is a coordinated construction document, LOD 400 is a shop drawing, and LOD 500 is not 200 points better than 300. No, it's an existing conditions drawing. So with that in mind, you have to think about, does the owner want to pay the architect, who's not really qualified to make shop drawings, to produce shop drawings? Or wouldn't he rather have that done by the contractor, where LOD 400 is necessary for fabrication? And the higher that you get between 200 and 400, the more restrictive you are to a single choice, a single system. So you necessarily wind up eliminating competitive bidding, or if you decide you want to change something, now the owner's got to pay the architect an ad service to change to LOD 400 for, product XYZ instead of product ABC. So choosing the LODs are specific to really what the need is, and you shouldn't be asking for more than what you need unless you're willing to pay for it.
Yeah, if I could add on to that, Pete, we talked about being selective about what you want modeled. This is a really good example, and we're all familiar with shop drawings. We don't ask for shop drawings of everything. We ask for shop drawings of specific things that need some fabrication information. And the same thing then applies to modeling. So if a certain element needs to be fabricated, I need fabrication information on it, fine, I'll ask for 400 there. And good point, Pete, you don't want to ask the architect for it, you want to ask the contractor for it. Okay, but on the other things we have drywall, for example. We don't want shop drawings of the drywall. We just need to know a wall type and where it goes. That's it. So we just need to be selective in what we ask for. And I think you said it earlier, Pete, 400 is not necessarily better than 300. It's not a value judgment.
Thanks, Jim. Pete, we've actually gotten a couple questions, a couple requests for you to repeat your dumbed down LOD definition, if you wouldn't mind.
All right, LOD 100 is a concept. LOD 200 is a design, which allows competitive bidding. LOD 300 is a construction document of a specific thing. LOD 350 is a coordinated construction document. And you say that jokingly, oh, you want me to coordinate my construction documents? I thought you only wanted construction documents. Well, LOD 350 is a coordinated construction document. So, for example, it would show not just the VAV box, but the hangers that attach the VAV box to the structural steel above. So it would be LOD 350. And then LOD 400 is a shop drawing, and LOD 500 is existing conditions, and there are little subsets within there where you can explain within LOD 500 what the level of accuracy is, like accurate within a half an inch, within 2 inches, within 6 inches, or highway construction within 3 feet. So you can use LOD 500, but you have to qualify it as to the level of accuracy of your modeling an existing condition. And it's based on perhaps a point cloud, which necessarily has measurements of specific points, but between the points involves interpolation or guessing as to where you think this particular model element is. So anyway.
And Jimmy, if I could just respond, there's an old adage about in construction about you should allocate. We're talking about risk and risk management as part of this our webinar series here. Allocate risk to the party most likely and most appropriate to take it. And I would argue this holds true with the hierarchy of modeling. Really, it should be the modeler should be the one most appropriate to take it, and we always are constantly working on that through the timeline of the project. And so you don't want the designer to do modeling when it's more appropriate that a trades or a subcontractor should do it. And so constantly communicating about that is really important.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks, Steve. So we have a question here in the chat, and then I want to move to our final topic of the day, which I consider to be one of the third rails of the BIM world. But before we get there, we have a question I think it's really good, and I'll direct it to, I guess, whoever wants to take it. And it is, if a contractor doesn't have a direct contractual relationship with an architect, then why would they use the architect's model other than just for reference for developing their own construction model? What would be the benefit of receiving the architect's model and being able to rely on it rather than just developing the contractor's own model?
Ooh, this sounds like another sales opportunity for the new AIA BIM protocol sharing documents. So, seriously, the whole idea of the new BIM exhibits is to between the parties, and let's say it's between the owner and the architect, is to tell the owner how much he can use the model with his contractor and with his consultants. So we are looking to establish some form of contractual relationship, although it's extremely limited. This is why you need to use our AIA documents and why you also need to consult with your attorney. But it is a way of granting limited reliance to someone other than with whom you have a direct contract or with whom you have contractual privity. So there is a way of accomplishing that, and it's with our new documents.
Great. So thanks, Pete. I want to turn to the last topic for today. We have maybe a little under 15 minutes to go. Excuse me. And I want to talk about models being used as a contract document, capital C, capital D contract document. So Jim, I want to come back to you and sort of say, we've been talking about this knowledge divide between, maybe the lawyers on the one hand and the contract negotiators and then the doers, the bidders. If you're dealing with a situation where your model is going to potentially be used as a contract document, how might that knowledge divide become amplified, or why would that be an issue?
Okay, we could get into an hour or two on this if we want, but and to add on to Pete's sales opportunity here, the new documents were designed really around to support the ability to use a model as a contract document. In the past, we've seen contracts that just say, okay, the model is a contract document. Okay, fine. That can get somebody into a lot of trouble unless it's better defined. Okay. First of all, there's really three major issues around using a model as a contract. The first one is that models can change, right? They're supposed to change. We develop them throughout the process of developing the project. We spent probably 2 years in the AIA Documents Committee arguing about whether the model could be used as a contract. And we finally realized that on the one side, the people who were saying it couldn't were thinking about the model, the central point of information in the project where it's evolving, right? Obviously, if it's evolving, that can't be used as a contract. Those of us that were saying, well, yeah, we can use the model as a contract, we realized we were not talking about the model. We were talking about a model. When we finally understood that difference, then the whole thing came together. Okay, so the first issue is that models can change. If you're going to use a model as a contract document, it needs to be a static, identifiable model. Okay, it can't be just any model. It has to be a static snapshot. So we call it in the documents, we call it a model version with a capital V, which is then defined within the documents. So just any model can't be used as a contract. It has to be a specific model version. Second issue is that software can change. Okay, so when you upgrade software, often the output of that software changes, so the previous versions of that software can't read it. So if 2 people on the project update to Revit 22 and everybody else is on Revit 21, we've got a problem, because now there are documents that only some of the project people can read. So there has to be, within the BIM execution plan, there has to be a process for team-wide upgrade of software and of the models produced. Third issue is that the reliability can be uncertain. You look at a model, everything looks precise. It can be measured precisely, but an awful lot of that stuff in there is intended to be approximate or a placeholder. As Pete was pointing out, we need to often leave room for the contractor to suggest substitute materials or equipment. So we don't know whether if we see an air handler modeled, we don't know whether that's supposed to be a carrier whatever air handler, or whether it's allowable for the contractor to suggest something else. So this is where the LOD matrix comes in, which is in the BIM exhibits, and that element by element specifies the reliability of the elements within the model. So those three issues are the major ones. There are obviously other more esoteric and a little bit harder to define issues, but the three major issues is, one, you need to have a static snapshot, identifiable version of the model. You need to have a team-wide software and model update process, and you need to have an LOD matrix that defines the reliability of the elements within the model.
Awesome. Thank you, Jim. I think you just reviewed 2 years worth of debate in about 4 minutes. So very well done.
That was excellent. That was excellent.
Yeah, and Steve and Pete, I wanted to give you the opportunity as well to maybe talk about this knowledge divide, specifically pertaining to BIM as a contract document from your perspective. So the negotiators and the doers. And I guess I'll go to Steve first. Like, as a your boots on the ground, you're the BIMers. Why would it matter to you if the BIM is considered a contract document or not?
I think honestly, that's the way it's been going. That's the way it's been evolving for a long time, whether or not the contracts are supporting it or not. Everyone wants to send the most appropriate level of documentation, and a building information model is high fidelity. It has good documentation in it. It's easy to read. It actually is easy to navigate through and see many sides of a detail or whatever. And there are some issues still to be developed at that. How do you check to see that there isn't extraneous information in the model? And I do think it comes down to the human factor that we just started out with this great divide. Is it really is, everyone on the team needs to understand what their role is, the fact that what they're putting into the model is really going to be part of a contract, and keep that communication going. I think that's going to be a critical aspect of it.
Another point to add on to that, Steve, it's a great point. And here's a scary thought. The contract documents are not defined by the architect. In most contract systems, including the AIAs, the contract documents are defined in the owner-contractor agreement, which often the architect doesn't see. So the architect can produce a model, and the owner can ask for it, and the architect says, "Fine, you can look at it." But then the owner lists the model in the contract, in the construction agreement, as a contract document. So then you're into the big hassle of what's accurate, what isn't, and so on. That's one of the things that we addressed first in the AIA BIM exhibits, was that if you sign one of these exhibits, the agreement is there whether or not you can use the model or a model as a contract document. So you can prohibit that use, whereas prior to these, and if you're not using these BIM exhibits, there's no practical way of doing that.
I want to, Pete, I'll give you the opportunity to weigh in.
Yeah, so I want to take everybody on a trip into the past and then ahead into the future. So when I think in the past of learning how to produce construction documents, number one, nobody would hire me unless I had good hand lettering, right? And I had to draw lines by twirling the pencil along a very long line so that the point remained sharp and the line was a consistent thickness. And I had to do everything that I learned about how to dimension a room, where to put tags, where to put the room number name box so that it didn't obscure important information on the plan. Everything was all about how to prepare clear and accurate two-dimensional documents. So now we're thinking those two-dimensional documents, they're the construction documents, which the owner and the contractor enumerate in their construction contract, and they get elevated to become contract documents. So now I've got those as contract documents, and somebody wants to enumerate my model. So in a panic mode, I think all the people in Steve's room, they had better be drawing things the right way and not faking stuff, and deleting all those temporary design options that they had that we're not pursuing. We're actually only doing one solution. So the model had better really be clean. So now I start getting really nervous about hiring people who really know how to model properly, because now my model is going to be at the same level of importance as my 2D output drawings that even I can look at. So if we then push into the future, we begin to think that a lot of what I had to learn as an early architect, I can forget about learning, because I don't need to dimension rooms the right way, because I can go into the model. I don't need dimensions, I can measure it. I don't need to put all those tags on all the walls or whatever, because if I click on them, as long as they're drawn right, I can find out what the properties of that wall is, and I know what type it is. I don't need to see the room name box, because I check the properties of the model and it tells me what room I'm in. So all of these things, all of this process that I had to learn, that took me probably 8-10 years to become a really skillful project architect, I don't need to learn that. Instead, those years get put into how to properly model, so that I'm not fudging things, and I keep the model clean and neat. And my labor gets rechanneled from the old part of the architectural practice or the engineering practice into the new part of the practice, which is making better models that can be used directly as potentially as contract documents. So that's the future. Maybe it's not too far away, like before I retire. But I honestly think that if you quit panicking about what we will have to do to make models look good once we give them to somebody and say, here, you can trust this, you can rely on it. Instead, if we start to think about investing our effort into actually drawing it right and producing it correctly and eliminating a lot of clerical type of work, so that you can produce 2D drawings that we don't need anymore. So anyway, that was my blast from the past and extension into the future thought about modeling, and that's probably where ultimately we want to go.
Excellent summation, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. And I think that's a great point to end on. I can't believe we've already covered an hour. This has been a really interesting discussion, and I think that it fits in well to where we're going next. So again, this is part one. Part one was more focused on the internal sort of that knowledge divide within a firm. You're going from Pete's office to Steve's office and back and forth, and how do they communicate better, and what are some issues that could come there. Part two, which is I think the third week in May, we're going to be talking about BIM or models being shared on a project. So going and zooming out a little bit from the intra-office issues that might arise from the knowledge divide to strategies for sharing BIM on a project, what the scope looks like from sharing in terms of like the the very, very siloed approach. We're not sharing with anybody. It's a full-on contract documents. Everybody can share it. Everyone can rely on it, et cetera. And what are some strategies to use in there? So I would invite everyone to tune in again. And I do want to say thank you to Pete, Jim, and Steve for taking the time today to be with us. And thank you everyone for attending. If you want to learn more, here are some resources where you can find out more. If you have questions about the documents, you can email us. Questions about the online service, you can email us and call us as well. We have a YouTube channel, and then our Learn and Help pages are also very good. So thank you again, gentlemen, and thanks everyone for attending, and I hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.